Hello and welcome to the Southbound Sports Show. I'm your host, Richie Leahy, here with my co-host, Matty B. And I don't know why you doubted me, Matt. Tom Brady won again, his 7th championship. And now I don't even think that there is a debate because he's in his 40s going to a team that hadn't even made the playoffs and then immediately took them and turned them into Super Bowl champs. Like Jordan didn't do that. He tried to come back with the Wizards, couldn't get it done. ESPN had a thing with LeBron, how they were comparing his 10 championships with Tom Brady's, and it's not even a comparison. Like LeBron has joined teams filled with superstars, and he only won 4 of those championships. Like he has a losing record. And if he eventually does get to 7, possibly, but he's still doing it the opposite way. Like Tom Brady went to the Buccaneers. They had a core. I wouldn't even say it was a great core. It was fairly good. I think everyone knew that they could take that next step. And
Their
he filled it
defense
in.
was in the top half of the NFL.
What?
Their defense was one of the top defenses in the NFL last year.
Matt, that team hadn't made the playoffs. And they only won 11 games in the regular season. Like it took the entire season for Tom Brady to teach them how to win. And even the coaches made comments about it. Like, oh, well, we started to let him do some of the teaching and some of the coaching. And then he was giving his input on the offensive game plan and stuff like that. And I think that's one part where they talked about, was it Todd Bowles? I saw an article where they were saying Todd Bowles should have a head coaching job tomorrow. And it was like, I looked at his stats. Dude, his winning percentage is like 388, like 38%. Yeah. He coached for years and he didn't win. So just because Tom Brady comes to your team and gets you the Super Bowl.
He's a good defensive coordinator.
What?
I said Todd Bowles is a great defensive coordinator, but I just don't know his head coaching.
But some of the stuff too is Tom Brady controlled the game. That one drive took like 7 minutes. And if you're able to have a quarterback that's out there with your offense, controlling the ball, not turning it over. I mean, he did take some shots and had some turnovers in the playoffs. So I'm not saying like he's completely perfect. But if the offense is able to control the tempo and keep your defense fresh, look at what they were able to do against the Chiefs. And I thought if you watched their offense, the Buccaneers, and just compared it 1-to-1 with the play calling from the Chiefs, it was night and day. I don't know if it was Tom Brady had the game plan or if it was Leftwich, but just based on that sample, Tampa Bay did a lot of different things. They were passing the ball. They ran like a screenplay to their third tight end at one point, or they had like, I think it might have been a crossing route. I think the screenplay was to break their backup tight end. Like who has backup and third tight ends even getting passes, Matt, in the Super Bowl? Like it's unreal how flexible that offense became and how they were using weapons that you don't see from Kansas City. Like Kansas City, they came out and you knew Mahomes is staring downhill. He's throwing into Kelsey in the traffic. I think Sammy Watkins had maybe one catch. He didn't pass the ball or spread the ball around. And I know he was under pressure for a lot of the game, but it was around the second quarter where I thought this game's over. He's staring down reads, and for whatever reason, almost all of their offense was 5 to 7 drops. 5 to 7 step drops, if you don't know what I'm talking about. Like they were slow developing plays. They didn't try to get Hill out on the edge with screens. I mean, like I said, Tampa Bay's throwing screens to everybody and their brother. Backup tight ends, Antonio Brown. Like it didn't even matter. They're just trying to get the ball out in space, and they were able to do that. Kansas City has weapons, and Tyreek Hill didn't even make an impact until garbage time. And I mean, there's nothing else about it. You can say, oh, Patrick Mahomes, he was under pressure. If you're stepping back, don't really have a threat of the run, you're not using screens to get that pressure off you, of course you're going to be under pressure. It's working. They did nothing to get around it. As a coach, don't you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a little bit more to it, but the biggest thing that stood out to me was I knew that they were down one of their starting offensive tackles, and probably me being a lazy journalist, I didn't even look to realize that both of their offensive tackles and some of the additional offensive linemen were out. And I think that was definitely a key to that game. But what amazed me more was that now knowing that they went in with backup offensive linemen, why they wouldn't try to use their tight end, like not even Kelsey, but like a backup tight end, or trying to move the ball out, like move the pocket. Because you're right, Mahomes was staring receivers down, but he only had like 2 seconds before he was running for his life and looking for, different outlets. I think that there was one of the stats that, like one of the next gen stats that they produced, they said that Kansas City was using 5-man protection on like 48 of 52 passes. With backup linemen, that was insane. Like Tampa's front four was able to get pressure, and they just sat in zone the whole game because their front was just generating so much pressure on Mahomes that he didn't even have any time to breathe. That was the part of the game that really surprised me, was that it was just like he couldn't do anything, just running for his life, and then the drops definitely hurt you. But when I texted you this earlier on in the game, I think Tampa's game plan was perfect. It was high percentage passes, it was quick throws, so they weren't going to be able to blitz and take Tom Brady out of his element. And I think that's kind of been, even in his New England days, that's kind of like what he's been known for, is he's almost evolved into an air raid style quarterback where he's throwing these high percentage throws, these quick hitters, and letting the receivers catch the ball in space and run. By doing that, the defense for Kansas City had to play a lot of more aggressive style coverage, and the officials took their defense right out of the game. I mean, they had almost 100 yards of defensive penalties in the first half alone. And I told you going into halftime that if I was Andy Reid, I'm getting thrown out of that game, because there's no way that you can be competitive in that style just sitting back and letting Brady pick you apart. So it was like the combination of taking them, the defense, having the additional penalties over and over, and the lack of, let's just set an edge and let Mahomes roll out. Like get him on a boot, get him on like some other, change his launching point so the defense can't just pin their ears back and go kill him.
Yeah, let me go back to the lineman injuries, because I know I mentioned it last week. Surprisingly, both tackles got hurt against the Bills. The first injury, he's been out since week 6. So I wouldn't even say that's, I mean, I know you're down your starting tackle, but I don't want people to think like that they just lost 2 guys on their offensive line right before the Super Bowl. Now, they lost the other tackle with a torn Achilles. That's what we were waiting on. I don't know if it actually came out, but I mean, we knew he was going to be out. You don't injure your Achilles and then you're back in a week. So, yeah, they had 2 guys out, but they've been playing all year without one of them, basically. It's not like he's been out and they've been just stumbling down the stretch. Like, they just killed the Bills. So I think a lot of that just goes back to the game planning, too. And Tom Brady, you're right, he does do some of the air raid stuff, but honestly, I thought a lot of those penalties were deserved. I think it was just, they were shocked. A lot of them, they were just grabbing and holding because they were beat. Like, they ran a lot of double moves, and they had guys going deep, and Tom Brady was throwing it up there to get him. Compare that to Mahomes' deep throws. where it seemed like the Buccaneers always had a guy over the top that was coming in, and like even the interceptions, like there was a guy breaking the ball up, tipping it into the air, and the defense was right there to catch it. Like Kansas City kept getting caught without a guy over the top, and their defender, they were tackling him. I mean, there were a couple that you could say, oh, that was questionable. I think there was one on Evans where I thought, I guess they could have let that one go because I don't know if it was catchable, but it's hard to tell when you're getting tackled. Like, you can't tackle them. It's just like the Saints one. Was it the Saints where they had or was that the Packers game where they had the hold? And they like extended the guy's complete jersey out at the end of the game. Like, you can't be getting burnt. Yeah. I don't understand why the Chiefs didn't have a guy over, and they had no answer for Gronkowski. I thought he could have been MVP, to be honest.
Yeah, I think an argument could have been made for him.
Because when he was in there, and like you said, going back to the Chiefs where they didn't have protection or were giving him any help, it's because they've been running Kelsey. They list him as a tight end, but he's basically a wide receiver. Like, he's not in there blocking. They don't have any other schemes. I don't even know if he lines up tight most of the time. He's out wide. So when you have him on the field, you kind of have to keep him in. Their offense doesn't have like a thing where they're like, okay, well, we either have to pull Kelsey out and then they know that the other tight end's most likely going to be blocking, or like they just didn't plan for it. That's why I said with Tampa Bay, they had a 3 tight end rotation, if you consider Gronk the starter, because he had big time plays and he played similar to Kelsey, but then they also had Brayton and they had a couple like 2 tight end looks and things like that. When Kansas City, they really didn't mix up their looks, and they were playing lockdown on Hill. And like I said, they always had a guy over the top, and that's where the Chiefs were able to burn them. If you went back and watched that last game where Hill did the peace sign, like they were just burning him over the top and they got a big lead. And then in the second half, the Buccaneers made adjustments and they were able to come back and they lost by a field goal. And it seemed like the Buccaneers took those adjustments that they learned in the regular season matchup and applied them in the Super Bowl, while the Chiefs made no adjustments from that game. It was like the second half didn't exist to them. And they said, you know what? We're going to come out and just run deep like we've been doing on everyone, and it's going to work. And whenever it didn't, they looked beaten. Patrick Mahomes looked like he was crying the entire second half. And that's not a look that you want in your quarterback when he's running basically the offense trying to make a comeback in the game. Because at that point, they're done. They're done. Hill was getting frustrated. You could even see Tom Brady. He was in the face of the Honey Badger because their defense was getting frustrated. They threw a flag on that one, which I was surprised they didn't just throw it on Tom Brady too. But at that point, they're not going to throw one on the legend. I thought that'd be offsetting. But that's basically my feel on the game. For the Chiefs, I think they came in too overconfident. They didn't have a good game plan.
I think their game plan was absolutely horrific, because one of the things that they did do well is I liked they played some games with Hill and his motions, but they ran a set. They only ran it once or twice and gained good yardage with it, but they motioned it back into the backfield and then swung them back out into a flare, and they had the defense out leveraged every time they did it. And I thought, how do you not just keep going back to that, like, and play like 2-man games with the wide receivers? Like, it'd be a trip set, like 3 wide receivers on one side. One guy would motion in and then kick back out. It was like they were running deep, and the other guy, like the back out of the backfield, was running wide open. And I just think that's always such a tough way to attack defenses, because you have to make tackles in space, and you might get them once or twice, but eventually you're going to rip off a big run hitting one of those plays, and it's a safe throw for your quarterback. something, especially if you're having no time to make plays, to set up. It takes pressure off your quarterback.
Well, that's a good point because the one thing, like you said, using the screens and stuff to try to get out. But the other thing that stood out to me is they basically just abandoned the rush. And I was like, why aren't they even trying to run the ball? Edwards-Helaire was averaging 7.1 yards a carry in that game. Matt, he only had 9 carries. He was their leading rusher. Patrick Mahomes carried 5 times. If you take out Mahomes scrambles, which count as rushes, they only ran the ball 12 plays. 12. Isn't that ridiculous?
I can believe it though, because they rely so heavily on Mahomes. I don't like it. It's why, for as much as even as a play caller myself, I throw the ball probably more than I should. You still have to have a fundamental base as a running style, or else you're not going to win. And kudos to Tampa, because the whole time I watched the Super Bowl, I was like, Leonard Fournette wouldn't have been able to run like that in Pittsburgh. It just pissed me off again.
I know. It baffled me why people weren't just bidding him up. And he kind of just fell to the Buccaneers, and they were like, oh, Jaguars were like, good riddance, let's get rid of that guy. And just to compare, Tampa Bay had Jones and Fournette both over 12 carries, more than Kansas City had total as a team. And they were averaging 5 yards a carry. So, I mean, if you just look at Kansas City had more average rushing yards per attempt, but they were like, that's not how we ball. We're just going to keep throwing it, and it's not working. I mean, our quarterback had a 52.3 rating. Like, bad. I think he was around 500 or 50% passing completion rate with the 2 interceptions, no touchdowns. Of course, they didn't even score a touchdown. But you would think that they would come back in and say, like, look, it's not working. A lot of people were making fun of Tom Brady. He only threw for 200 yards, of course. He also had 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. He only took 1 sack, and he hit 21 of the 29 passes. He had, that one drive, he was 7 in a row. And they just kept eating the clock and eating the clock and eating the clock. And then next thing you know, they're up, and they had such a big lead that it was almost like Kansas City, should they just start kicking onside? Because they got that field goal in the third, and I thought, there's no momentum here. I know that they had to just get points, but as soon as they kicked that, I thought, they're not even trying at this point. What are you going to do? And the time of possession wasn't even that bad because of that fourth quarter, it felt like Kansas City had the ball the entire time. So it kind of evened it back out. But those first 3 quarters were brutal. So I don't even know. I think that they came in, poor game plan. They only lost 2 games all year. Remember that. They're 14-2. So it's not like they came in and this was a surprise. Yeah, they're just lucky to be here. No, they were supposed to dominate this game. And I feel so bad for people that hammered Kansas City with second half bets. The line in the second half was Kansas City -7. And they lost the second half. So all those people lost money on that game. No wonder they were turning it off. That's all I could say. You got anything else that stood out to you?
No, those were the big things. And going back to the whole penalties in the first half, I think that just makes things so much more difficult when you have a game plan that you believe in and you think works, and the officials kind of take it away from you by calling penalties. It changes the way that you call your defense, your offense, because you're trying to avoid those. You're trying to adjust to the game within the game, but it's still it makes it that much more difficult. And there were a couple plays from Tampa's side that I thought that they're saying, oh, that's just a good physical play. And it's well, if that's on Kansas City, they're definitely throwing the flag like the opposite way, and it just had it had that level of feel. And then even Romo going into the third quarter said, "Yeah, these penalties are really lopsided. I'm sure you'll see the refs trying to even this out in the second half." It's like, but the damage has already been done in the first half, so like it's not going to matter. Like by that time, because they had the drive where they were trying to get points, but then they ended up taking the timeout that gave Tampa the first down, drove down and scored the touchdown before the half. So it was one of those coin flip type plays that do you take the timeout trying to conserve clock to get the ball back, but all they did was they gave Tampa more time to let Brady drive down and score again before the half.
I mean, to be honest though, this is something that's not, like, I don't think it was one-sided call. Like, the Chiefs were one of the most penalized teams all year. Like, that's how they played. Grabbing guys on defense, and it's not like they got away with it. They had 105 penalties all year. So, I know they had 11 in the Super Bowl, but like I said, there weren't really any that stood out besides the one that was to Evans, I believe. The deep ball where it looked like he dove and tried to grab him and tripped him up. And the ball looked like it might have been too far. But the other ones were just, I mean, they were blatant. Like, you just can't tackle the guy. So Kansas City did nothing to help them. If they had help over the top, Matt, I could see it. But all of the Tampa Bay ones that looked like they weren't, like they could have been penalties, I thought there were a couple where the guy came early. Double coverage. I think Kelsey had 2 drops like that, where the defenders converged. He came up looking for a flag, but the ball hit him in the hands. And it was double coverage. Like, at that point, you can't just reward the offense for making a piss poor throw. And I think that's the one thing that stood out. Like, if Kelsey wouldn't have had those drops in the second quarter, I think both were like back-to-back drives. Third downs. The one was like coming from the end zone that led to, I think, the touchdown right before the half. I thought, well, that was uncharacteristic of him, even though he was being covered. I thought throughout the year he's been pretty short-handed, that I was surprised he dropped it, and he just looked shook. And I was thinking, like, he's gone. Like, you just can't be dropping big passes like that if you expect to move the ball. And if you're looking and you're hearing footsteps, then it's going to bother you. And I think that's really stood out to me, was the difference in it. Like, Tampa Bay's penalties, they were burning the Chiefs and they were just tackling them. So, like, what else could they do? I mean, that's what, even if you're looking at the stats here, because I have it up, defensive holding, the defensive offsides on the punt. Was that the punt or was that a field goal? Was that a field goal, I think?
Yeah.
Like, that's inexcusable. So, like, you can just throw that one out. And they get 2 defensive pass interference calls. And then Andy Reid called the timeout, stopping the clock for Tampa Bay. And it's almost like this is a disaster. So, I don't know. I mean, they can call some of the ones that were down at the goal line, but, like, you can't be calling timeout and you already stopped them for a field goal. You line up off sides to try to get the jump. You didn't even block it. I think he would have made it anyway. So, I don't know. I looked at the stats. Tampa Bay didn't really get any penalties, you're right, but it wasn't like the Chiefs were helping themselves. Going back to the under pressure thing, Russell Wilson came out and said that he's getting hit too much. And he wants to be able to have a say in the Seahawks front office moves. What do you think of that?
I think it's fair, but I also think that he really didn't have. Who were his offensive coordinators? I know Brian Schottenheimer was one, and did he have Tom Cable was the other one? I'm thinking that's who, like, his two coordinators, where at least Cable was the offensive line coach there that had some struggles. And, I mean, to me, I understand, and they should take him into consideration whether the ownership or management decides to do that. I think that's just fundamentally sound things to do, because you look at what Pittsburgh does with Roethlisberger, what the Broncos did when they had Manning, what Tampa's doing with Brady. I mean, even to an extent with what Breeze was able to do with the Saints. You take what your quarterback's able to do and you build around him, and you give him the things to let him succeed. I think the NFL is really stuck in its ways of trying to jam round pegs into square holes. And the teams that are able to kind of account for their quarterback and help their quarterbacks out are the teams that end up playing so much better.
At this point, I wonder if it's just looking for an excuse. I mean, the Seahawks have been in good positions in the playoffs. They have to be feeling the pressure. How many years has it been in a row where they've choked in the playoffs? And so you're coming in as a franchise quarterback. It's almost like never worked, where the guy comes in and says that he wants to be able to make personnel decisions. Like you brought up Brady, and Brady brought like Gronk with him and Antonio Brown. He's not like bringing scrubs. Like Antonio Brown was like the number one receiver for a while, and Gronk was the number one tight end. So of course you're gonna listen to them, like on that. And I think that's just like him bringing along his friends. But like Russell Wilson, who's he want them to sign? Does he want them just to sign offensive linemen? Is he pushing for a trade? Because that's the one thing that I think might be at play here. Because there's been some reports that the Seahawks have been receiving calls asking if he was available. And to be honest, if you go back to the Tom Brady deal, I said last year, every single team except for the Chiefs should have been trying to get Tom Brady. Every single team.
Well, that amazed me that there was only two teams that had an interest in him, the Chargers and the Bucks.
Well, he wanted to go to the 49ers, but they were like, oh, we're sold on Garoppolo. I know they went to the Super Bowl. They're shopping Garoppolo again. So it's like, what kind of front office? Like, that franchise is still a total mess. And for them to just pass on him. And it was like, I mean, I got some flag. People were like, oh, you really want the Steelers to get rid of Ben Roethlisberger? What would have been the difference, Matt? A Super Bowl champion? Like, I think anyone that's not in denial would say, okay, yeah, I guess our team would be better with Tom Brady. Because there's no other argument against it. He took a team that hadn't made the playoffs and just won the Super Bowl. And you could say, like, okay, he brought those other guys with him. No one was signing Antonio Brown. No one was signing Gronkowski. He was retired. Gronkowski only gives out of retirement to play with Tom Brady.
Well, and if I was Pittsburgh, I don't know that they have the cap space to go out and, like, even if they let Roethlisberger go, to sign Brady, Gronk, and Fournette. Like, I don't know if they would have been willing to do that.
Well, I don't think they needed to sign all those deals. Like, I don't even know. I think Tom Brady might have mentioned Fournette or whatever, but it's not like he had played with them. That one kind of just fell into their lap. And I was surprised people weren't trying to outbid them. I think if you're looking back at it, like if they would have been able to trade Roethlisberger for pieces, they could have definitely signed Tom Brady and Gronk. I just think Tom Brady wanted a multi-year deal. And I think a lot of teams were like, you know what? We're not going to risk it. And like he was pushing kind of for the Saints. I know that they were waiting to see if Drew Brees would retire. And I understand the Saints. They had Drew Brees. He's basically their franchise. So you're not going to push the guy out in hopes that Tom Brady comes and wins you a championship. But even if they push Breeze to retire and then Tom Brady wins a Super Bowl there, like how bad does that make Breeze look then? Like it's not like Tampa Bay had a good quarterback situation. Like they were plagued with turnovers and stuff. But that's the one thing, like now, I think that's why you're seeing moves. Teams are seeing like, okay, wow, that was crazy. Tom Brady did just turn that team around. And so I think that's why you're seeing the Lions say, Matt Stafford, all right, you're gone. And if the Seahawks get rid of Russell Wilson, I honestly think Tom Brady winning the Super Bowl is the reason. Because it seems like this year, every quarterback is available. The Steelers are meeting right now with Ben Roethlisberger about his contract this week. Might as well shift right into that. And there's talk that they might not even be able to make any meaningful cap space just with him. So now you're looking at it and you're wondering, okay, if they get rid of him, then what happens? If they keep him, there's so much pressure then, they're going to have to talk to other veterans on the team to see about making moves. Like you have Joe Hayden, Steven Nelson, Pouncey, and DeCastro, all with significant salaries against the salary cap. Is Ben going to be able to get those guys to take a cut so that he can come back? Because he's only one part. If they get rid of him, then you're still going to have to move some of those other pieces around, I would think. I mean, 10 people hit $156 million of the team's salary cap, if I'm doing the math right. So it's very top heavy for Pittsburgh. And that's why I'm wondering, like, even if they would get Ben Roethlisberger, but the more I thought about it last week, like if you're the Redskins or Washington football team, whatever they're called, why wouldn't you try to make a play? Their defense looked solid, almost very Buccaneers-esque. I know they're young. They have some young pieces. Did Chase Young win the Rookie of the Year or whatever for defensive player of the year? So they have that there going for them. And so you're looking at it, and I see them very similar to Tampa Bay. Why would you not want to bring in a veteran quarterback? I know you did that with Alex Smith, but let's be honest, he was injured. And that was such a freak injury, it's tough to come back from that. Why not go get a guy and try to make a run? Why not trade for a Roethlisberger and see what happens? And the worst thing that can happen is what? A year or two, your defense gets a little bit more experience, and then maybe you can draft the guy later and turn him into a 6th-round Tom Brady. I mean, that's like the worst case scenario, is maybe you make the playoffs and get a couple playoff wins. So if I were fans of that team, I'd be hoping that the offensive or the front office would make a move like that, because why waste it? Sometimes it might only be one quarterback comes in, changes the culture. Maybe the quarterback needs a change of culture. I don't know for some of these guys, but do you think Roethlisberger comes back next year to Pittsburgh?
I don't know. I think a big part of it's going to be what Matt Canada does with the offense. I think if he really tries to tinker a lot with the scheme, I think they may just try to push him out. I also think it may depend on how the pieces fall with the draft. If they're able to, if someone like Trey Lance falls to him, I think they're crazy not to draft them. And then does that make Roethlisberger expendable?
Well, here, since you brought Lance up, that reminds me of my guy, Carson Wentz. The Eagles changed their coaching staff, brought in a coach that was supposed to work with Wentz, and then after all the quarterback moves, they were like, you know what? We're open to trading Carson Wentz. It's like, how messed up is their front office? It's like, what are you doing? Did the coach go in? Because they're not allowed to work out with players, right? So it's not like he came in and saw what he had and was like, yikes. Like, what? Are you serious? Take that back. And they're like, no, we'll trade him. Because we heard it from too many guys already. So,
well, he would have previously worked with him because he coached with Wright. I thought.
Yeah, I thought they brought him in just for that reason to keep Wentz. I don't know though.
I mean, I think if you can acquire some more draft picks, or if you're making a trade, then you end up getting some more offensive linemen. Like you're like replacing some of these guys with cheaper players. It might make sense at this point. But I don't know if Roethlisberger would agree to go somewhere else at this point in his career. He may just say, hey, I'm done.
Yeah. I mean, if he wants to prove himself, though, I think Roethlisberger, if he wants to come back, I think he comes back. And right now, I'm leaning 70% that it's with a different team. Because just look at all of the love that Tom Brady got after that Super Bowl. Like, it has to eat up some of these guys. Like, you're sitting there and you're thinking, wow, everyone loves him now. They either love or respect him. Like, there's no one talking trash. There's no one saying, oh, it's because of Belichick. He went out and did it again while he's super old. And so people are just like, oh, let me just tip my cap to you, sir. So I honestly think a lot of these guys are very competitive. And I think if the Steelers come and say, like, look, we're going to have you take a salary cut, he can look around that team and say, like, look, this team's pretty dysfunctional. Like, they couldn't keep any wide receiver under wraps for the past, how many years? 5, 6 years?
But is that a reflection of Brady's unwillingness to just get his locker room under control? You know, where they said, oh, Brady taught us how to win. Is Roethlisberger letting them just be douchebags?
Well, that's what I'm saying. If he gets into another situation with the coach, then maybe controls it. Because some coaches did that. Look at what... You really think Eli Manning had control over the Giants locker room? Hell no. Tom Coughlin did that. And then he immediately got control of the Jaguars. And then, is he still there, or did they get rid of him?
No, I think they got rid of him.
I honestly think they got rid of him, and then they fell back down to getting the top draft pick. Like, I think if you look at the graphs, they correlate. When they get rid of Coughlin, and then, like, didn't he wreck his bike or something? I can't remember. But I'll say he was in charge of that locker room. So if Ben could find a place, and you know he's going to interview with the coaches or whatever, find out what the teams are, and say, like, look, I'm going to have to be open to a trade or whatever they end up doing. But that locker room, they can say, like, look, we got a head coach that's in charge of it. And all you're going to be doing is focused on the offense. Like, I think that would be a good change of pace for both teams. See what happens. I mean, obviously we saw last year without the Steelers, not good. But anyone else that looked at Ben this year, they could see, like, look how much better he made the Steelers. He would instantly take Washington to clear division champs. Not like this backing in. Could lose to the Giants and have a crappy losing record. I'm talking like an 11-win season like Brady brought the Buccaneers. And so maybe...
Oh, so Roethlisberger to the Raiders.
Maybe. Do you think John Gruden, though, has his pieces in place?
I don't know. He's talking about possibly moving a quarterback. It's rumored that he'd rather move Mariota, though, than Carr, which I think is a mistake.
Well, the other team that's been talking, like I mentioned earlier, would be the 49ers. They missed on Brady. Now they're coming back with it with Garoppolo. I wouldn't even mind seeing him with the Steelers, because how could that be worse than Mason Rudolph and the other guys? And worst case scenario, you're going to have like a quarterback battle. Maybe they can learn. Haskins can learn under those guys. But then Roethlisberger goes back out west, a run-first offense like he won his first Super Bowl with. And he has Kittle at tight end. They were injured heavily this year. So those injuries come back. And he's in a spot where maybe he takes them to the next level. I know he's never lived out west. He was like an Ohio, Pennsylvania guy. But who knows? Change of scenery for a year or two might be good for him. That would be I think that would be the one to me that would really say, okay, all right, I could see a 49ers Buccaneers NFC Championship game next year. Why not? You got anything else?
No.
All right, the last one, I know I skipped it on my list on the live stream if you're watching it, but Marty Schottenheimer. He coached 21 seasons in the NFL. He has the 8th most wins. He died at age 77. So just wanted to give a shout out to him. And a crazy run. Never had success in the playoffs, Matt.
Some guys don't.
I know. It's crazy. The ultimate champion of life.
He did do a lot of program building, though, because he went to a lot of teams that weren't very good and built them into playoff caliber teams.
And his regular season winning percentage was .613. And when we're talking about some of these coaches that need a second chance, and it's like, oh, well, they're a 500 win coach, maybe they can get a couple wins. It's like Schottenheimer had that, and then he went in the playoffs and he was 278. And it's almost like it's like a crazy run. Because I thought he came close to a Super Bowl. But then I thought my years might have been mixed up.
Because he was on the goal line. He was the coach of Cleveland when the game of the drive with John Elway. They were right there and he fumbled it away.
Yeah. So I knew they came close. They said that he only had 5 playoff wins, and I was like, just knowing the name is crazy. But they tried the run, and you could even say that he built that Chargers team. And I know a lot of people were disappointed in them, but is it him? Is it the quarterback? Because maybe, Rivers never really won any playoff games, no matter after they lost Schottenheimer or not. So maybe it was him. It wasn't like Bruce Arians was winning playoff games, Matt. We'll never know. His final game in the NFL, he lost to Tom Brady, Matt. They were 14-2. In 2006, they lost to him in the divisional round. So I really wouldn't count that against them. All right, anything else in the NFL? I don't know if I missed anything.
No, I don't think we missed anything.
All right. College football. Said we'll talk about signing day. It's official. Classes are in. Like I said, there was barely any movement on that last day. I honestly think the only team that moved might have been Michigan moving back up into the top 10. I don't think I remember seeing any other teams even flip. And maybe I'm wrong. Because I thought, okay, well, there's a couple guys that are going to decide on this last day, but I'm pretty sure most of the top picks had already signed and or the crystal balls were in, where when they decided that was it. So you had Alabama, Ohio State number 2, and those two are, again, head and shoulders above everyone else. And then you have LSU, Georgia, and then Clemson in the top 5. But this is where it's big. Clemson has been making moves, and I think, unfortunately for you, Matt, that's really turning the tide in the ACC. And I want to see what their blue chip ratio is, because I think these last couple playoff losses were on account of recruiting classes that weren't really top 10. I think these past 2 years, they've really upped their game from recruiting, and probably winning a couple national championships had to help that. And I think that's really going to put the ACC so far behind, where you're looking at like an Ohio State situation where you have Penn State and Michigan, they're kind of battling for that second place, but the divide is so clear that unless they stumble somewhere else, the other team can't have any mistakes. Like, they basically need to get lucky like Penn State did a few years ago. And outside of that, it's not going to happen. The crazy thing to me, though, Miami recruiting well. Because it doesn't seem like they're happy with their coach. Do you get that vibe?
I don't think they're happy with anything ever. They're always just angry.
It's always like, I see these coaching things, it's like, who's going to hire this hot up-and-coming coach? Miami seems like they're always on the list, and I'm like, what? Then they just have a pretty good year? It's like, of all the teams, it's not like, you'd be like a shock to see like a Clemson on the list, like of upcoming coaches, like they might land at Clemson. It's like, no, but they might end up in Miami. Never know. And so I thought that was crazy that they're up there. And Mac Brown still getting it done at North Carolina. Do you think Texas has any regrets, Matt?
I'm going to say no.
Now let me ask again. What if they would have hired him back? Instead of him going to North Carolina, what if they would have hired him instead of Tom Herman? North Carolina's been much better program than Texas. Do you think that time off would have let him, almost like a Bill Snyder, come back in fresh and potentially have Texas competing for national championships?
That's a pretty bold statement. I just don't know. I mean, I guess technically they probably could have, but I think the more time had passed, obviously, since he was at North Carolina, and I think from being on the coastal side, I think there's less spotlight for him. Now, with the coaching staff that he assembled, if he was able to assign all those guys with him at Texas, I think there's definitely a chance that he could have been competitive, that he would have been successful, just as successful at Texas. But I don't know, what that relationship was like when they fired him.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the records right now. So Tom Herman, he was pulling in 7-6, 10-4, 8-5, and then 7-3 were his records. Mac Brown, he started 7-6, so very similar to Tom Herman, went to 8-4. So not really much better, but again, you're not going to get the Texas recruiting bump. So I'd be curious to see what happened. Now, going back to his original run at North Carolina, he started with a couple 1-10 seasons. And it took 3, 4, 5, 6 years for him to actually hit 10 wins. So it took a while for him to build that program. Where at Texas, he walked in, ran a couple of 9-3s off, and then started to get consistent double-digit wins for, it's like almost 10 years in a row. If it wasn't 10, I'm not counting those. So crazy, but he's definitely upped North Carolina's recruiting to the point where they're coming in this year with a positive blue chip ratio. But the one thing that's going to stand out, the recruiting class sizes are different. I think I sent you a stat. Was it Texas State? They didn't sign any recruits this year. Let me see if I can find it. Because I thought that is crazy that you're going to come in to almost like it's just like the transfer portal or whatever the hell it's called. Like, they're heavily relying on that so much that you would think that their entire coaching staff has to be on the hot seat. Because this is what it actually says. The Texas State Bobcats have not signed a single player out of high school for their recruiting class. They're dead last in the recruiting rankings. They've only brought in 11 transfer students. And so I was thinking of the transfer portal, but even then, you're basically coming up empty because you can bring in 25 recruits. So they struck out so much. And remember, those seniors that could be leaving, they don't count against a scholarship limit next year. So if I was Texas State, if I was a fan, I'd be, you almost have to have no confidence that your coaching staff will say, like, we're going to take these 11 cast-offs, and that is our movement for next year. What do you think of that?
I think that's a crazy thing, but we kind of talked a little bit about this before, where I think it's mattering more now, the relationships that you have with some of these other players. So as they're hitting these transfer portal stuff, if you have a good relationship and you're seeing that they're still progressing, if you can use the transfer portal to your advantage, then why not take advantage of that, as opposed to gambling on a player fresh out of high school. You know what you're getting, a little bit more through the portal, and maybe less. You're getting more guys that can immediately step out and play, as opposed to having to wait, which is, from what it sounds like, Texas State's not really in a position to wait and develop guys.
I don't think they're really churning through coaches either. It's almost like, is a coach just trying to get a hot season so he can take a better job? Because some of those are just stepping stone jobs. But I feel bad for, like, if you're a high school player and you're looking and you think, like, oh, I could go D1. And they're like, not so fast, my friend. We're not signing it. We're not signing any high schoolers this year. You're like, what? Doesn't make any sense at all. But I guarantee, Matt, they're passing out those preferred walk-ons. Guarantee. Because I'm sure their coach, maybe they just took a lazy approach where they said, you know what? We know we have this many scholarships. We're not going to cut anyone. We're just going to keep the status quo and just go. I wonder, I didn't even look up their record. Let's see if I can find it.
But that also might be a situation where they're looking at, like, maybe we're just going to sign a much bigger 22 class and roster all those extra ones for next year.
Nah, they went 2-6 last year, Matt. They're not thinking ahead like that. They're not coming in with a game plan whenever your record is a losing one like that. But my final note for recruiting stuff is related to that. I saw, I think it was in Michigan State, one of their recruiting, I don't even know if it was a recruiting guy or just a fan, but they like had a mental breakdown whenever Michigan flipped one of their recruits that pushed them back into the top 10. It was like, how frustrating is it to be a fan of a program that's not a blue blood, knowing that any blue blood can go 2-4 like Michigan did this year and then just sign a top 10 class next year. Like, it's no big deal. They look like garbage most of the year, Michigan. And then it didn't even matter.
I've really started to take less stock in the recruiting rankings, because it just seems like, we've joked about it on here, where how many times has Michigan had a top class, but then they just completely bottom out during the regular season anyhow.
But they also had the most players in the Super Bowl, Matt, tied with LSU. So I don't even know if it might just be poor college coaching, because it seems like a lot of these guys are playing at the next level and being successful. So it's kind of like, oh.
Well, gee, if you're hanging around till you're 90 years old, I guess you will.
I mean, that one year, Harbaugh had 11 guys drafted? And it's just like he's not getting it done. And honestly, I think college comes down to a lot of the quarterback stuff. And I know he's supposed to be a quarterback whisperer, but I honestly think that you could add another 2 wins if he develops a better quarterback a year. And I think everyone would be happy with that. And I honestly think that that's where the drop-off is. Because there was that one year where he had the transfer come in, and at the end of the game, they had a chance to go down the field to beat Ohio State. First pass was like an interception. And it's like, why are you playing a transfer? It's like, what are you doing? That was John O'Korn. And then O'Korn's offense that same year against Michigan State couldn't get anything going in the rain. They end up getting upset. It's like, you develop a quarterback in college, and then I think things will go. And it's not like he had Pep Hamilton. Pep Hamilton went and developed Herbert last year in the NFL, he won Offensive Rookie of the Year. So it's like, okay, maybe they're just out of touch with the college guys. If you have success in the NFL, maybe you're just better as an NFL coach. I mean, we see it. Like Nick Saban, obviously a much better college coach. So maybe he'd go back to the NFL. I don't know. But that's the one thing that stood out to me is like, okay, some teams are just going to get their guys. And then developing them, that's a whole other thing. But then that made me look at Michigan State's rankings way worse than what they're normally doing. So Mel Tucker, you would think that they could maybe feed off that Michigan win. Nope. They're ranked 43rd behind Cincinnati and Rutgers. Shiano, which I was honestly surprised Shiano was that far back. Because I thought he would at least be in the 30s. Coming back to Rutgers, getting a few wins, and trying to build off that momentum. But to your point, Penn State, a similar situation. They had the recruiting drop-off. They came in with a 21 ranked class, 21st, behind Maryland. And I honestly wonder if you get Shiano, he starts getting guys in New Jersey, and Mike Locksley starts keeping guys at Maryland where Penn State recruits heavily, is this going to be a thing that possibly pushes James Franklin out? What do you think?
It definitely could be something. I think with firing and getting another offensive coordinator, I think that the hot seat's definitely there for him this year.
You think he should have took the Tennessee job?
I do not think he should have took the Tennessee job. But
which, Matt, we talked about Tennessee last week, and they said fans are going to be excited about this hire. And they hired the guy from UCF that I said would be so underwhelming. Heupel. Is that how you pronounce his name?
Heupel.
It's like, why? How could you go out and say, we're going to get a coach that excites fans, and then you make that hire? He's made UCF worse since Scott Frost left. They've done nothing.
He won a national championship there.
What, as assistant?
Yes.
Yeah, assistant. Look how good the head coach is doing. So you're like, oh, we got a guy from Scott Frost tree. Let's check on him. Ah, yikes. Like, that's not adding excitement. I could be shocked, but I honestly think that they had no interest in their position. How could you? They had a chance a couple years ago to hire either Mike Leach or Greg Schiano. They hire Schiano. Fans riot. So they take it back. They blame it on Sandusky. And then, now look at their program. Could you imagine? They probably would have had success with Greg Schiano. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
That's my last tidbit. Has to be better than what they're getting, Matt. Has to be better than what they're getting. NFL ratings are down. The Super Bowl ratings were 91 million tuned in. I thought that was a complete giant drop-off. And this is for my final bell. But 2 years ago, they were under 100 million as well. And I wonder how much of it is just people going digital. And in the digital space, if the game's a boring blowout like this one was, they're not going to watch the whole time. They'll just close the app and go to something else. But I don't know. Not too worried about it. It's still the biggest sporting event. I did think it was weird that they had no fans there, but yet they had like the fake lights and stuff. And I thought that they pre-recorded the entire halftime show because the field looked different than what it did during the game. So did you get the same vibe?
I thought the halftime show was really weird. I ended up partially half tuning it out and just started doing some schoolwork.
Well, I had it on and it was weird and it was kind of disoriented for me. And I thought they had to have pre-recorded this. So I found an article from the New York Times that said that they were pre-recording the halftime show because of coronavirus. They didn't want people to go down on the field. So they said at the actual game, he was going to perform like normal because like they still actually perform during the game. They just usually pre-record it so that it doesn't sound like crap or that someone's nipple doesn't pop out. So they learned their lesson. But they said that during the game, he would have had to perform in the stands because of the restrictions. They couldn't clear everyone down on the field. But it didn't matter, Matt. They had a streaker anyway. That was on TV.
Did you see the money he made, though?
No. How do you make money?
Apparently, there were bets being made to see, like, is there going to be someone that is going to streak during the game? And he made like a $50,000 bet, knowing that the payout was going to be like $350,000. So the guy that did it, like, made this bet, went to the game. His buddy distracted a security guard so that he could get out on the field, and he got arrested. He had $1,000 fine and went to jail. When he got out of jail, he cashed in his bet and came out with $350,000.
You don't think they could sue him for that? Because that's like rigging the bet. I mean, Pete Rose got kicked out of the Hall of Fame for the same thing.
Paid out, dog.
I'm surprised he said it was only $1,000 fine because I thought for sure coronavirus would land that guy in jail for however many months for putting people at risk. But then again, I guess they're in Florida. They might not have.
They were in Florida, which hats off to the NFL for choosing Florida, knowing that even if the zombie apocalypse was upon us, they'd still be like, we're going to still open it up and get some fans in there.
Yeah, possibly. I don't even know what the thing's going to be next year, but I hope that the plan is something similar because I would hate for it to be somewhere where it's
it'd be in Jerry World, where you know that Dallas will be open.
Dallas, maybe. But then, hey, maybe you're right. Maybe they're thinking, oh, Tampa Bay had it and they won the Super Bowl there as a home game, so Dallas would be a perfect fit. They can sign Ben Roethlisberger, take him right to the top, Matt.
They can trade Dak.
You got anything else for the show?
Actually, some news from your area I wanted to hit on. I was a little bit excited that North Carolina's getting ready for their high school football season. I was able to catch some clips from my old program, Grace Creek, and like the stuff that I was seeing as far as getting into spring. And even though you guys didn't get to play in the fall, a little bit jealous that you're getting some action there in the spring. So definitely looking to make a field trip down to check out some games in March.
Yeah, I was worried that they weren't going to have it at all because I thought the initial plan was to try to have it in January to February, followed by a shortened basketball season. But I don't know if they flipped them because I want to say that some basketball was still going on. And so I don't know because that would make sense while it's colder, do the indoor sport and then go outside. But hopefully they get them in. I think things are opening back up, so it shouldn't be too much of a bother, but we'll see going forward. So, yeah, definitely something to look forward to during the traditional off season. You have anything else for the final bell?
Nope.
I have one more thing, Matt. I go out to Food Line, and I don't know if you thought I was going to tell this story or not. If I go to Food Line pre-Super Bowl, and I'm like, I gotta get some snacks for the game because otherwise I wouldn't have anything. So I'm looking to see what chips and stuff are on sale. So I'm standing there, had a Steelers mask on, of all things. And I get this tap on my shoulder. And there's a guy. And he's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I thought you were Dan Marino. And I thought, what? And so I looked at him and I said, well, like, Dan Marino? And he said, yeah, the football player. I'm sorry. And so I had to just bust out laughing. I thought, why would you think that Dan Marino is at Food Lion in North Carolina on Super Bowl Sunday buying chips?
Well, he's retired. He's not playing in the game, so that part I understand.
You know what it was, Matt? It's my fit running figure that I have They saw me. They thought, wow, this guy must be on Nutrisystem.
They thought he's a former athlete, not a current one.
They thought, wow, what a great figure this guy has. Just like that beach commercial where Dan Marino's throwing the ball around. And I mean, definitely muscular enough to be a former NFL player. So definitely fit the bill there. And he did win a national championship, so he's technically a winner. Also matches me. So I could see the mistake. The only thing that worried me is that he's like 30 years older than me or so. So hopefully it was the mask. He didn't see my youthful smile, Matt.
There we go.
Thinking that I was like a 60-year-old man. He has to be that old, right? I didn't look it up before the show. But that's my last thing. I figured I'd end on, I don't even know if it's a positive note, but hopefully a funny one. Thanks for checking out the show. We'll be back next week. Football is over, but we got a lot of stuff to cover. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you again.